On a misty morning, April 12, 1944, deep within the marshlands near the Oder River, a group of German engineers huddled around their maps and tools. The air was thick with fog, the ground beneath their boots soft and treacherous. They had spent weeks fortifying defenses along this swampy terrain, confident that no Allied vehicle could cross these waterlogged fields. Among them was Oberleutnant Hans Weber, a man in his early 30s, with sharp eyes and a quiet determination. He had studied every inch of this battlefield, convinced the marshes were an impassable barrier. The sluggish water, the tangled reeds, and sinking mud were all on their side, or so they believed. Suddenly, from the dense fog, the distant rumble of engines began to grow. The men paused, straining to hear the unusual sound. Then, emerging slowly but steadily, the unmistakable silhouettes of Sherman tanks appeared, rolling over what was thought to be a death trap for heavy vehicles. The engineers' surprise was palpable. How could these bulky machines move through the swamp without sinking? How were they defying the impossible? Hans's heart pounded as the tanks churned forward, their tracks biting into mud and water without hesitation. The German defensive line, built to halt any armored advance, suddenly faced a challenge no one had anticipated. Watching the Shermans glide effortlessly through the swamp, Hans felt a mix of admiration and dread. These machines, once dismissed as average, were proving they could overcome nature itself. The landscape, meant to be a natural fortress, was being breached before their very eyes. As the tanks pressed onward, the fog began to lift, revealing more Allied forces moving into position. The engineers scrambled to adapt, realizing their strategy had a fatal flaw. The seemingly impenetrable swamp was no longer a shield. Hans whispered to himself, "They've found a way. Something we never saw coming." Oberleutnant Hans Weber was born in a small town near Dresden. A former civil engineer turned military officer, Hans had a passion for maps and fortifications. His sharp mind had earned him respect among the Wehrmacht's engineering corps, especially in designing defensive structures that used natural terrain to Germany's advantage. By early 1944, Hans was tasked with overseeing the defense preparations along the Oder River. The area was crucial, a natural barrier against advancing Allied forces in Eastern Europe. The swampy wetlands had been considered an excellent defense line, where tanks and heavy equipment could easily become bogged down and immobilized. Hans knew the importance of this mission. Every trench dug, every obstacle placed, was meant to stall enemy advances long enough for reinforcements to arrive. He believed firmly in the strength of careful planning combined with nature's obstacles. On the other side, Allied commanders were seeking new ways to breach German defenses. The Sherman tank, though sometimes criticized for lacking heavy armor compared to German Panzers, was reliable, versatile, and produced in great numbers. Its design allowed engineers to adapt it to various battlefield challenges. Among the crews operating these tanks were soldiers from the U.S. 3rd Armored Division. Many had never faced terrain like the Oder marshes before, but they trusted in their machines and the training that had prepared them for difficult conditions. Sergeant James Thompson, a tank gunner from Ohio, recalled the tension before the advance. The swamp looked like a trap. Mud everywhere. Water rising. But we had orders. No hesitation. His voice carried the grit of a man who'd learned to face fear with action. As the tanks moved forward, their tracks cut through mud and shallow water, supported by innovations like wider treads to distribute weight and prevent sinking. These engineering details, combined with the crew's determination, turned the marsh from a barrier into a path. Hans watched helplessly as the tanks crossed what he did deemed impassable. His mind raced, questioning his own assumptions and the limits of his knowledge. The landscape that once offered confidence was now a battleground of adaptation and survival. The unfolding scene was more than a military maneuver. It was a testament to innovation and determination in the face of seemingly impossible obstacles. Two sides, each trusting in their strengths, collided in a swamp that no one expected to be crossed. The morning fog had lifted, revealing a battlefield transformed by unexpected motion. The Sherman tanks pressed deeper into the Oder marshes, their wide tracks swallowing mud and water with surprising ease. Oberleutnant Hans Weber stood frozen, watching what he had long considered impossible unfold before his eyes. For Hans, this was more than a tactical. Defeat it was a challenge to everything he believed about warfare. terrain and limits of machines. He had spent years studying maps, learning how the natural environment could be an ally in defense. But here, the Allies had turned his most trusted fortress into a crossing point. Sergeant James Thompson, in the lead Sherman tank, felt the tremor of engines beneath him. The swamp was relentless, sucking at the wheels and tracks, but the tanks held steady. "We had to keep moving," James recalled later. "Backing down wasn't an option. The mud tried to drag us under, but we fought it every inch." The transformation wasn't just physical, but mental on both sides. The German engineers grappled with a newfound respect for the enemy's resources, even as it unsettled their confidence. For Hans, the moment forced a shift in perspective. It was no longer enough to rely solely on geography. Adaptation was vital. The Sherman tanks were engineered with wider tracks than many of their counterparts, designed to reduce ground pressure and navigate difficult terrain. But technology alone did not guarantee success. It was the courage and skill of the tank crews, working under relentless pressure, that turned theory into reality. As the tanks moved forward, Allied infantry followed closely. Using the breach to advance through a route the Germans believed was barred forever, communication lines were extended and supplies began flowing into newly gained positions. Hans found himself rethinking his own role. His job was no longer just to build defenses, but to understand how they could be broken, how his own side needed to innovate or risk being outmatched. In the days following, Hans and his engineers worked tirelessly to reinforce new positions, learning from the unexpected breakthrough. The war, he realized, was a constant battle of adaptation, innovation, and survival, not just firepower or numbers. For the Allied soldiers, crossing the swamp was a defining testament to persistence against harsh odds. They faced constant danger, not just from enemy fire, but from the landscape itself. Tanks risked sinking. Men struggled through waist-deep water, yet they pushed forward. Private Michael Harris, an infantryman, described the scene. "You could feel the swamp trying to swallow us whole. But every step forward was a victory. We knew this was our chance." The Germans, including Hans, documented these moments with a mixture of frustration and art. Reports would later highlight the effectiveness of the Sherman tanks' engineering, especially their adaptability in varied terrain. Yet, beneath the strategy and tactics lay a deeply human story. Men on both sides faced exhaustion, fear, and the brutal uncertainty of combat. The swamp was indifferent. It challenged all who dared cross it, friend and foe alike. Hans Weber's transformation from confident engineer to reflective strategist embodied the war's unpredictable nature. His respect for the enemy's ingenuity grew, even as he prepared to counter future advances. The Sherman tanks, once underestimated, had proven their worth. They were not just machines, but instruments of change on a shifting battlefield. As the sun set on those muddy fields, the Germans prepared for a new reality, one where no natural barrier could be taken for granted. For the Allies, the swamp crossing was a symbol of hope, endurance, and the relentless will to overcome. The morning after the Shermans had surged through the swampy marsh, Oberleutnant and Hans, Weber stood amid the wreckage of his plans and the shifting tide of war. His defensive line, once thought secure, was broken by the relentless determination of men and machines defying nature itself. In the German command tent, the mood was tense. Commanders debated furiously. How could such heavy tanks traverse terrain deemed impossible? How could their fortifications, built over months with sweat and calculation, be rendered useless so swiftly? Hans, usually calm and methodical, found himself haunted by a thought that seemed almost unbelievable. What if the Allies had discovered a new tactic, a new way to use their technology and terrain together in a manner that no one had anticipated? The idea was simple, yet revolutionaries in swamps and marshes not as obstacles, but as pathways for armored vehicles, exploiting the very geographies the Germans had trusted to protect them. Hans reviewed intelligence reports and captured documents that hinted at experimental modifications made to Sherman tanks. Wider tracks to spread weight, reinforced suspensions, and even engineers attached the tank units to clear paths on the go. The implications were staggering. If the Allies could move heavy armor through such difficult terrain, entire defensive strategies would need to be The natural barriers that once protected key areas were no longer reliable. This realization sparked a desperate push to adapt. German engineers began studying captured Shermans, attempting to reverse engineer the modifications and develop countermeasures. But the question remained, could they outmatch a force willing to use innovation and grit to conquer the impossible? Hans understood that the war had entered a new phase. Success would no longer come from static defenses or natural geography alone, but from flexibility, creativity, and rapid adaptation. Meanwhile, Sergeant James Thompson and his crew, unaware of the German panic they'd caused, prepared for the next phase of their mission. The swamp crossing was just the beginning. Orders came to push further, to exploit the breach and seize strategic points deep behind enemy lines. The thought of driving tanks through swamps had once been dismissed as folly. Now, it was a spark that ignited a chain reaction of tactical shifts on both sides. Hans's mind raced, grappling with this impossible idea that had reshaped the battlefield overnight. He knew the coming days would test his skills and resilience like never before. The sun rose over the mist-covered marshes as Sherman tanks rumbled forward, pushing past the initial breakthrough with a mix of mechanical might and sheer willpower. Each vehicle was a lifeline, a beacon in a battle that seemed to defy nature's limits. Sergeant James Thompson gripped the controls tightly. The swamp threatened to swallow his tank at every turn, mud sucking at the tracks, water rising around the hull. Yet, with every inch gained, the crew's confidence grew. "Keep steady, boys," James commanded, voice steady despite the tension. "This is what we trained for." The terrain was unforgiving. Tanks sometimes sank deep, requiring quick thinking and teamwork to free them. Engineers worked alongside the crews, cutting through thick reeds and reinforcing soft ground with logs and planks. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and oil, punctuated by distant gunfire and the occasional explosion. German forces caught off guard scrambled to respond. Artillery fired from hidden positions, and snipers targeted the advancing crews. Yet the momentum built as each tank that crossed the swamp opened the way for infantry and supplies. Hans Weber coordinated defensive efforts, moving quickly to plug gaps and reinforce weak points. He sent out patrols to gather intelligence and ordered his engineers to prepare mines and barricades in hopes of slowing the armored advance. Despite these efforts, the Allies pressed on. James's tank spearheaded an assault on a key bridgehead, its tracks carving a path where none should have existed. The crew's faces were streaked with sweat and grime, their eyes sharp with determination. Achihuan moment, a shell exploded nearby, shaking the tank violently. The radio crackled with orders to hold position. James relayed the commands while keeping his gunner ready for any. In the chaos, a German patrol attempted a surprise attack from the swamp's edge. The tank's machine gun roared to life, cutting down the threat before it could reach the crew. Every second was a battle for survival, every movement a test of skill and nerve. Back on the German side, Hans watched helplessly as the breach widened. His respect for the Sherman crews grew with every passing hour, even as he struggled to find a way to stop them. The swamp was no longer a natural fortress, but a contested battleground. Both sides fought fiercely, each determined to control the shifting landscape. After hours of grueling combat, the Allied forces secured a crucial foothold. Supply lines were established, and reinforcements began to pour through the once impenetrable marsh. James's tank, battered but unbowed, had become a symbol of that success, a testament to endurance, innovation, and the human spirit. For Hans Weber, the day ended with a bitter lesson. War was not just fought with weapons, but with ideas. The impossible could become reality when courage and invention met the unforgiving will to survive. The breakthrough of Sherman tanks crossing the Oder marshes was more than just a tactical victory. It became a turning point in how battles were fought in challenging terrain during World War II. The German defensive line, once thought impregnable thanks to natural barriers, was now revealed to have serious vulnerabilities. Hans Weber's reports detailed the unexpected resilience and innovation of the Sherman crews. The tanks' design, adaptations, wider tracks, reinforced suspensions, and the ingenuity of their crews had transformed the swamp from an obstacle into a viable route for advance. Military strategists on both sides took note. The importance of flexibility and adaptability became clear. No longer could commanders rely solely on geography to protect positions. Instead, they had to anticipate and prepare for new forms of warfare. Historians later recognized the Oder Marsh crossing as a significant example of how technology and human determination could overcome natural challenges. The Sherman tank's reputation, sometimes overshadowed by more heavily armored German panzers, was redefined by its performance in difficult terrain. For the German engineers, it was a sobering lesson in the limits of static defenses. Hans Weber himself would go on to emphasize adaptability in his later work, understanding that war was a constant contest between innovation and countermeasure. Yet, beyond tactics and machines, the story reflects the human cost of such battles. Soldiers endured exhaustion, fear, and the relentless threat of death in unforgiving environments. Their courage to push through swamps and mud was as vital as any weapon. The crossing became a symbol of resilience, how men and machines, when united by determination and resourcefulness, could overcome the odds. It shaped future military thinking and remains a poignant reminder of World War II's complexity. Years after the war, the marshlands near the Oder River remained quiet, a silent witness to the fierce battles that once raged there. Oberleutnant Hans Weber reflected on those days with a mixture of respect and regret. For Hans, the swamp crossing was a lesson not only in military strategy, but in humility. It reminded him that war was unpredictable, shaped by countless small decisions, innovations, and acts of courage on both sides. The Sherman tank crews, including Sergeant James Thompson and his comrades, carried with them memories of the grueling march through mud and water. Their experience became part of a larger story, one of perseverance amid hardship. Families on both sides remembered their fathers, brothers, and sons who faced impossible conditions. The crossing became a chapter in the shared history of a war that changed the world. The legacy of this event lies in the enduring human spirit, the will to adapt, to push forward even when the path seems blocked, and to find strength in unity. It shows how ordinary men, facing extraordinary challenges, can shape history through grit and innovation. Today, historians and veterans alike honor this moment as a testament to courage and adaptability, free from triumphalism or blame. It reminds us that in war, survival depends on more than firepower. It requires heart, creativity, and the relentless refusal to give up. The marshes, once battlegrounds, now stand as peaceful reminders that even the harshest environments can be crossed, and even the darkest times can inspire hope. This is the history of World War II. Whoever oppresses the innocent is an oppressor. Neither the earth belongs to this oppressor, nor does the sky belong to him. We stand now and forever with the oppressed. 3 questions for the audience. 1. If you faced a path that seemed impossible to cross, like those Sherman tanks in the swamp, would you find the courage to push through? What fears would hold you back? 2. When everything seems stacked against you, where do you think true strength comes from? Technology, skill, or the human spirit? 3. If you were part of a team facing overwhelming odds, how would you keep everyone's hope alive? And how would you keep yourself going? This is WW2 Files. See you in the next one.